Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh is brought to you by
Collectible Insurance Services, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Rydan Investments, Encore Business Group, Jim Hegland of JH Realty, Williams Chiropractic, I-Core, the West Michigan Sports Commission.
Sports Intel with Ryan Walsh.
Stay informed and stay vigilant.
I'm in studio here with Aaron. Aaron is on the board here. He's got his branded shirt. I never really comment on that. You've got different ones. This must be themed for me, Aaron, because you've got an iced tea one on, and you know how I like to drink tea. I need it right now too because I can hear it in my voice.
Yeah, I was going to say I could see the tea right there. But yeah, Gold Peak's one of the Coca-Cola brands, so they gave us shirts for other brands. So
I feel like I'm used to I don't want to get the wrong drink, but I think you have an energy drink one too.
Oh,
right?
yeah, the Monster one. Yep, I have that as a quarter zip too.
I have never had that. If I have that in studio, I won't be responsible for what I do afterwards. I've never had an energy drink, but okay. So we've got some things to do here, Aaron. We got to decide on the national day here because we've got a few choices. It's obviously, Aaron, you usually seem to be our holiday representative because we are on a holiday technically here, and you're always in here on a holiday. I feel like you get the holiday shifts with me, so sorry about that.
No, that's fine. I mean, I didn't even catch that really because I was like, yeah, that's kind of true. It was your Christmas Day.
Yep.
I think it was New Year's.
And you've done Labor Day, you've done Memorial Day, I think, with us.
Yep.
So
showed up late.
So yeah, we're not going to mention that. That's the statute of limitations is up on that one, I think. But so it's too dicey to go favorite president or anything like that. We're not going to deal with that. But there are separate days that we can celebrate. I like the juxtaposition of this. It's National Almond Day, so we could go like favorite type of nut or legume, or it's Do a Grouch a Favor Day. I put that one down because I just like it. I don't know what we do with it, though. You would have to pick like a grouchy friend and say, in the next 5 hours, I'm going to do something for them here. I'm going to send them a nice note or voice message or something.
Oh, if I had to pick one, though, I was like, I got to pick almonds. I was like, I don't know about the Do a Grouch a Favor.
I just like the concept of it. I like that we can like pick. I mean, I don't know that I want to call out any like grouches.
Yeah, neither do
in
I.
the Jethro in the Jethro universe. I was having this conversation with Dan on Thursday because we got on. I forget how we got into the subject, but we were closing up the show and we were talking about the coaching situation at the Lions, and we were comparing the Jethro universe to the Lions coaching universe.
Ooh.
And it was a good crowd. Yeah, I feel like you'd like this subject matter because I don't know how we got into that or how it started, but the first comparison was Big G to Dan Skipper, and that was my favorite. That comparison is just great for me. I don't know why Dan thought of that, but then we were trying to play everybody out and figure. I think you maybe got Scotty Montgomery. We did have you because I was like, well, Aaron's an actual coach. Who are we going to make him? And then you might have gotten Scotty Montgomery, and we didn't have enough time to build it out.
Yeah, Scott, I ain't gonna lie. I was like, I don't even know who that is.
He's been the running backs and the receivers coach for the Lions. I believe he's currently the receivers coach. He switched over after Randall L left.
Yeah, but I was gonna say
from the running backs to the receivers. But he's so that I don't know why he was acting very fast about his choices on things because then whoever we were talking about. Then John Morton was coming up, and we were talking about the new offensive coordinators. So that's something to work on here. That's a project for us. But I'm not going to say who, but there's somebody on that list that I've not that I've named necessarily, but that I feel like could fit into the category of Do a Grouch a Favor Day. And it's like, well, okay, maybe we'd make them less grouchy if we do them a favor.
Yeah,
Yeah. So you're like the rising tide that lifts all boats. You're doing somebody a favor, and then they do somebody else a favor, and it becomes a whole pay it forward Haley Joel Osment situation.
Yeah.
So that's when we can celebrate. It'll be tough with these guests. I don't know if I have the mettle to ask these particular guests that kind of question, because we have Keith Gave coming on. He used to write for the Detroit Free Press. He was there kind of in the glory days. He was there with Mitch Albom and a bunch of the other high-profile writers there. And he was the one. You probably know his writing if you're a Red Wings fan, because he wrote The Grind Line and The Russian Five, a lot of those books. And he also wrote A Miracle of Their Own. He's been on the show before, and we had him on to talk about those other books. And afterwards, he messaged me and said, hey, we didn't get a chance to talk about A Miracle of Their Own, which I did mention after he got off air. And I mentioned it in the next segment just to make sure we hit on it. But it's especially pertinent now because it's about the 1998 U.S.-Canada Olympic matchup on the women's side of things, when the U.S. team was building up and developing, and they had never beaten Canada, who was basically the powerhouse, and so it was kind of the equivalent. That's why I called it A Miracle of Their Own, to the 1980 Miracle format from the Mike Eruzione. I don't know if you remember. This is old. I mean, it's even older than me, Aaron. So it's older. No. It's older than you. But that was a fairly infamous hockey event at the Olympics. So this was something that really moved things forward as far as women's sports in general. It was huge into the representation of things, and so now we have more college programs and even a professional women's hockey league, kind of as a result of this game. And I had a buddy at work that was asking me about if I watch anything on YouTube on my TV, and I actually saw the game on YouTube. It's nice to pull up the old games on YouTube. Do you ever do that? Do you pull up like an old football game or something to watch on YouTube? I feel like it's got a lot of stuff on there.
Oh yeah, I'm a huge. I mean, it's not even really that old, but the Auburn-Alabama game, the 2013, the kick six.
Oh yeah,
yeah. I always go back and rewatch like the highlights of that game, just because that was like I remember like vividly just being there watching the game, and it was just like to me, I mean, I'm as far as being a coach, I'm a kind of a nerd when it comes to like offensive schemes and stuff, and I'm a huge Gus Malzahn fan, and he was the head coach at the time. So like seeing them and Auburn to this day, like I don't know why they let Gus Malzahn go. He was probably the only coach to ever take down Nick Saban 3 times in his career.
That's impressive. Yeah, he was a good coach, or is a good coach. I shouldn't say was, I guess. But I'm curious from your perspective here, Aaron, because you are a football coach. We had this is how the conversation started, was we were talking about Drew Petzing and the hire of Mike Kafka, and that's how we were getting into the Jethro universe of who was Kafka and who was Petzing. But I'm curious what you think of that. I'm wondering if you saw the Pride of Detroit interview that they did. It was kind of like the first media availability for Petzing. They did basically a one-on-one interview with him, and then Eric Schlitt and Jeremy Reisman, both who have been on our shows, on basically his scheme, his plans, and all of that. So I was curious if you caught any of that.
I didn't catch that, but I did see a bunch of videos on the old offensive coordinator from the Arizona Cardinals and like what he did when he was there, and I think he kind of fits into what Dan Campbell wants tight ends in there. He wants to run the ball, and I think obviously that fits what we have. I think it is kind of interesting though with the 2 offensive coordinators. I'm assuming that's how they're going to play. I'm assuming what's going to end up happening is one's going to be on the field, one's going to be in the booth, and I always kind of like that. It's always, eyes in the sky. You can kind of see things a little bit differently from there. Obviously, it's a little bit more technologically advanced now with being able to use like the iPads on the sideline and stuff like that. But something about being up there in like the press box, being able to see everything is unique, and I think it'll be a good fit.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the fact that you have one of each, because that was, I think, maybe part of the problem with Morton. Morton didn't get enough time. I know he's going to go down as, this is a failure, but he didn't get a lot of time. I get them moving on from him. I'm not advocating that they should have kept him, but it was hard to see different iterations with him because he really wasn't even given a full season. But he was up in the booth there, and I would imagine that Kafka is going to be the one up in the booth because Petzing said he prefers the field, and I think he's more of a kind of run-oriented kind of guy, and I assume Kafka will be more in charge of the passing game, which to me would make sense. You're better with these perspectives of things, but being a coach, but I would think it would make sense that I know you can see the run plays develop from above well as well, but especially the vertical passing game, it's probably a lot easier to see the routes and things when you're in the booth if you're the one in charge of the passing game.
Yeah, I mean, I agree too. I will say this though too, for me, at least being a kind of an offensive coordinator, being able to see like defensive fronts, like how like it's tough to see that from the sideline. Obviously, when it comes to like passing, it's better to see from above too. But I think in general, you can kind of see a little bit better on the sideline, like as far as like the secondary and the linebackers and stuff like that, as opposed to like the D line, because that was always like the thing I always had. Our varsity offensive coordinator for our games, he's usually up in the booth, and you'll kind of help me out there too, just because teams come out with weird odd fronts where they line up their 3 technique, whether they're an odd team, even team, and try to figure out, like, especially if you're going to be a team that's got to run the ball, you kind of want to be able to see it from a bird's eye view where he is lined up. It's kind of tough, I guess, to see it from the sideline as opposed to above.
I like the idea of them being in tandem. I think this is a good way to. I feel like they're trying to address what was an issue last year, which was the offensive play calling. Obviously, that we like to get into the grander concepts here. It was very rudimentary to say, well, Morton failed. Okay, well, there was probably some things that could have been done better. But one of the things that I think was underrated during Ben Johnson's time with the team is that he usually had somebody, John Morton was even that at one point, to help advise him through the process as a young offensive coordinator. He was given all the credit because he's kind of the stovepipe of that. He's the one calling the plays, and so he's going to get the credit. But Campbell's participating, obviously, and then he had offensive assistants participating. I think now they said, okay, the best way to replace this is to go back to let's get kind of a hive mind going with these multiple guys. And Kafka, I thought, was good enough to be their offensive coordinator. That's who I was rooting for. If you said who do you think they should hire, that was my number one guy. I didn't want McDaniel at all. Yeah. No offense to him. I don't think it's a good fit. I said that multiple times on the show because you're doomed. You're darned if you do, darned if you don't. If he does well, he's going to leave in like 2 years for a head coaching job. If he doesn't do well, then he's going to get let go in 2 years anyway. So you're not really built for the long term, which this is supposed to be sustainable here for the Lions with the coaching staff, the players, Holmes in place, all of that. So I like that they're going with a multi-prong attack here and saying, okay, the best way to do this is to get 2 minds being better than one here. Yeah,
and then the one thing I actually just now thought of that too, because you brought up if McDaniels, if he leaves, then you get to fill that spot again. But now I think having 2 guys there, let's say if one leaves to be a head coach somewhere else, you still got the other one there. So I think having that in there, having that in place, I think helps them because offensive coordinators in general tend to the turnover because they're either going to get a head coaching spot somewhere else. I think having 2 guys there who can fill that role, I think is better for him as opposed to just having one.
Definitely, because worst case scenario, people could be saying, well, the same thing could happen to Petzing. He could do well and he could be like Ben Johnson and he could move away in 2 or 3 years. Yeah, he's at a lower standing right now than McDaniel was, but if he does as well as Johnson or a similar job, he could move on. But like you said, you got other guys that could potentially fill in, and then it's a good feather in your cap. If you're Campbell, you're building out your coaching tree and you're showing that people can get hired. That's why McVay is able to get so many guys on his staff as well and replenish so well, because he's good at identifying talent and he can also get guys other jobs. So so it'll be interesting to follow. We'll be talking about it more on Thursday here. We'll actually have Jeremy Reisman, one of the ones that interviewed Petzing from prior to Detroit, on the show on Thursday. So we'll talk to him in depth about his thoughts on the new offensive coordinator and what he thought after the interview. But we're gonna turn our attention to hockey here. We're gonna talk some Olympics and some historic hockey with Keith Gave, who I mentioned earlier, former Red Wings beat writer. I'm going to try not to say Wed Wings at any point in time when Keith is on, because that will be embarrassing. But we're going to have Keith on. He's got great information, and he's, as we talked about with Dan on Thursday, he's the only other person that I know of that went from intelligence into sports content. So you'll have the only two people that did that I'm aware of on air talking to each other. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring this next guest on. It was one of my favorite hockey interviews that we've done. He's really a historian in the Detroit market. He was, as I mentioned before the break, he was in the glory days of the Detroit Free Press. He's written a lot of books that I'm sure if you're a hockey fan, you've read, because he's written the Grind Line and the Russian Five. But he wrote another book that we didn't get a chance to talk about the last time, A Miracle of Their Own, and I dove into it this weekend. I even watched the 1998 Olympics, Keith. I was able to pull that up on YouTube here, so I've even seen the game. But it's really a great book, as all the books are that Keith has written. But it's a landmark event too, because I was thinking about this in the terms of the All-Star game for the NBA this weekend, because you have the NBA that's a world game now, and I was at the 1992 Olympic trials in Oregon and saw that dream team live, and you see that time frame and you say, okay, they inspired a lot of these younger people internationally to get into the game, and because representation matters. They saw the U.S. on the world stage, they saw these other countries on the world stage, and that's kind of what's happened with this 1998 team, which I imagine was one of the reasons you were interested in them, because clearly with what we've seen as far as the development of women's hockey now, after they had their big victory in 1998 that inspired A Miracle of Their Own, now there's a lot of growth in the women's game, because all those young women saw the representation of, look at these American women and what they can do.
Well, Ryan, you're absolutely right. First of all, thanks for reading the book, getting the book and reading it. And with any luck, and this is a real moonshot again, but I have heard from not one but two different movie companies in Southern California who are interested in maybe doing a film about that 98 team, the monumental upset of Team Canada by Team USA for the very first Olympic gold medal. I'll tell you what, talking about representation, those girls who played on that team, they played with and against boys growing up, and they were often the best player on the ice with those boys. There were no girls teams then. Very, very, very few in Canada, but not very many. But what these girls, ages 7, 8, 9, 10, and beyond, what they had to go through to play the game that they loved, the sport of hockey, was absolutely crazy in the 80s and 90s. You'd think we'd have better opportunities for young women then, but we did not. And it wasn't until those women put together that team led by Cammie Granado, Karen Bai, Lisa Brown Miller, from here in Michigan, Shelley Looney, who scored the golden goal from downriver Trenton. It wasn't until those women found a way to upset Canada, much the same way, Ryan, as the American college kids beating the Soviets in 1980 for a real miracle, obviously. But the women had one, too, in 98, and it kind of got things going for a next generation of women. We see it now this week in the Olympics with the United States and Canada still the two dominant teams. They're on a collision course. They're going to play one another this week, and it's going to be much-watched TV.
Exactly. That's why this is such an important story to cover. I'm glad to hear that there's potentially a movie in the works, because obviously we know how well Miracle did as a movie,
Yes.
and this is equally as deserving of a movie, because you hit on one of the points that I wanted to talk to you about as far as what these women had to go through when they were young, because I'm sure people are thinking, well, okay, 80s and 90s, Title IX was in effect, but a lot of the programs hadn't really been given a lot of leeway and a good launch by that point, especially in something like hockey. And I talk about this a lot when I talk about professional hockey. I even talked about it with the issue regarding Gibson moving over to the Red Wings this year, because he had a little bit of a slow start. You still follow the Wings, but he's got to do. I tried to remind people, okay, not only is he starting NHL goalie, but he's trying to adjust everything else in his life. He's trying to move from his old team to his new one. So he's got to adjust not only on the ice, but off. And that would have been a constant for these women, where they constantly had to adjust to, okay, how do we deal with locker room situations? How do we deal with equipment issues? How do we deal with the fact that we're getting constantly made fun of or poked fun at because we're women in quote unquote a men's sport?
Sure. You're absolutely right. And these young women, girls, growing up, even before puberty, during puberty, and so on, they want to play the game. They have to find a closet to dress in, or a restroom, or something like that. They're constantly body shamed by their own teammates. Sometimes, young boys are. They don't have much of a filter sometimes, and I can remember Sarah Teeting, the gold medal winning goaltender. She played high school hockey in Illinois, suburban Chicago. She played goaltender on the boys' team that won the state championship in Illinois. She was the goaltender. And the stuff that she had to put up with, the chanting, Sarah Teeting has a big 5-hole, and all kinds of other stuff that the adults and fans of other teams are chanting. That sounds ridiculous, some of it. But they persevered, obviously, and got a little bit lucky, got good at the right time, and took advantage of a really, really good Canadian team that they just had a bad day in Nagano, and the American women won it. And it's quite similar. I think that team, the women's team, and all the little girls. The growth in girls hockey just exploded in this country and Canada too, by the way. But it was kind of neat. But I always go back to the 1980 Miracle game where the Americans beat the Soviets. When that 1980, guys like Mike Bonanno, Jeremy Roenick, Bill Guerin, that whole generation of boys were 8, 9, 10 years old, right? And they're the best athletes of their age groups when they're growing up, and they suddenly realized that it doesn't have to be football, basketball, or baseball. These young college guys went out and beat the mighty Soviets. Pretty good story. Kids started to get interested in hockey. All of a sudden, you got all those boys that I mentioned are in the Hall of Fame today in hockey that might have chosen baseball or football or basketball back then, but they chose hockey because of what happened in this country after the Miracle on Ice game.
Exactly. I mean, this is why I like concepts like this, because I was always interested growing up in books like The Tipping Point or Freakonomics, things that you analyze concepts, because it's easy. This is kind of analogous to my sports show as a whole, because I like to cover kind of the in-depth stuff like this, whereas a lot of people are just satisfied covering, okay, well, why did he drop the ball? They didn't convert on 4th and 7 or what have you. That's a little rudimentary to me. I like to go to the origin stories of a lot of this stuff. But for something like this, you have to go way back because, the seeds are sown a long time prior to a lot of this stuff. When you say, oh, well, why do we have such an international feel to basketball now? Or why is the women's hockey league, and both in college and the pros, why is that growing so robust? Well, you got to look back 20, 30 years and see what was happening then. And what was amazing to me is watching that YouTube broadcast. They were even talking about it on the broadcast. They basically were saying, hey, this is, these women and these coaches know what they're playing for. Yeah, they're playing for the gold, but they're playing for something much larger because they're on the big stage. They even had the quote from Coach Ben Smith talking about how, hey, he wants to be, if he's golfing and he's golfing with Canada and he's standing on the green and they have to make a long putt, he wants them to make their putt and then he wants to make his putt on top of it so they can give the best stage for these women as a whole, and they did so.
Sure, you're right. But you mentioned 50 years after. 50 years has been. The book came out in the 50th year of Title IX. 50 years, right?
Right.
And the game is growing in a lot of places, except maybe not here in Michigan. And that's a travesty, Ryan. That's a travesty. The state of Michigan has 7 Division I men's programs, hockey programs in the state. 7 of them: Michigan State, Michigan Tech, and so on. There are 0 Division I women's hockey programs in the state of Michigan. 0. So if you have a daughter who's a pretty darn good hockey player and you want to watch her play college hockey someday, you might have to go to Columbus and watch her play at Ohio State or Penn State or Wisconsin or Minnesota or someplace, because Michigan State, none of these other big programs that have men's programs have women's programs. That is outrageous.
It is, and I want to tell you, I did have this on my list. I was not going to get out of this interview without talking about it.
Thank you.
And because that was number one, and it's basically part of the epilogue of the book. You refer to it, and why? I know when we first started talking about this book, which was probably almost a year ago after your first appearance on the show, we were hoping that there would be a program in Michigan by then. Why do you think that hasn't happened yet?
Honestly, I don't know. It's not easy to start a program. It's not easy to start an expensive program. It's not easy when you have one sheet of ice at the University of Michigan at Yost Arena and the boys don't want to share it. That's the problem. They don't want to share it. But you can't tell me, you know better, you know sports, sports economics and so on. I mean, the University of Michigan prints money, period. When that university says, well, we'd like to add women's hockey, but it's awfully expensive, we're not sure we can afford it, I don't buy that for a second. Not for a second. If they wanted it, they had it 10 years ago. It's outrageous that we have to send our daughters out of state to play highly competitive hockey when they get out of high school here. It's just wrong. Why don't we have it? I don't know, but I think if Michigan, there's been a study sponsored by and paid for by, I think the NHL even is involved in somehow. There's a study out there about bringing hockey to the University of Michigan and what it's going to cost, to get it off the ground and annually and so on. And that's being talked about now. There's been a change of presidency at the University of Michigan recently. The outgoing president was all in terms of a women's hockey program, and he's no longer around. I don't know where the new president stands. I know a couple of the regents are all for a women's program. One of them being Denise Illich, the daughter of Mike and Marion Illich of the Detroit Red Wings ownership. And I know that Denise is pushing really hard to get a program going. I don't know where they stand, but as soon as Michigan gets a program, Michigan State will, and then Northern, and then Michigan Tech, and Western Michigan, and Sault Ste. Marie, Lake Superior State, and so on. Get these women's programs so they could play. They have opponents to play nearby within the state, and then our daughters can stay home and play college hockey.
Exactly. And with all these tentacles that are out there, you would think that there would have been more momentum because, like you said, it is kind of a domino game at this point. If Michigan does it, then the rest of them are going to do it, but you need somebody to break that dam and let the water flow because you're talking about the Illich's daughter and the connections with the Red Wings. Obviously, we've got Hockey Town there. You know the history and have chronicled the history better than anyone from hockey in that city. And then you have all the great teams and rivalries at a college level here in Michigan. It's just kind of criminal that we don't have the women's side represented as the sport has grown so much elsewhere.
Yep. And it's taking moments like this, you and I talking about it, other people talking about it, and when we have to bump into somebody, a University of Michigan regent or the new president out there or whatever, or at any of our universities, why don't you have a women's hockey program? You want me to write a check for your foundation? You better get in the game and give our young women the same opportunities you give our young men in this state.
Exactly. And you hit on a great point as far as the economics of things. Universities have been crying poor for a while, and that's hitting deaf ears, I think, at this point, especially with everything going on in football and NIL and
Well, you fire a football coach and he's got a $60 million payout, and you pay him, he walks away. Well, what does that tell the world? And we just had another one this week, and somebody just got fired. He's got $19 million left on his contract. They just pay him and let him walk away. So you're right. You're right, Ryan. Don't tell me you don't have any money, because you do.
Exactly. They've tried that for a while, and then we saw it here. Obviously we had the whole thing at University of Michigan and with the football program, but Michigan State's been dealing with this in succession basically, and then you've got this all over the country. So there's a lot of leeway here, and there's got to be opportunities out there. But like you said, it takes some motivation. It takes conversations like this. So we're going to take a quick break and then return to the conversation here with Keith and talk about women's hockey and the progression of it, and maybe sneak in some wings too if we get a chance. But stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Keith Gave, having a great conversation with him. Keith, I have an aside here because my producer on Thursday, Dan, one of my regular producers, he was talking about how the combination between a background in intelligence and then going into sports must be unique to me. I said, no, there's an OG here, and I'm going to talk to him on Monday. So I wanted to make sure I said that before we got you on, but I said, it's a conversation between the only two with that background that I know of.
Yeah, and that's something. Who would have thought, eh? Who would have thought?
It's a surprisingly good combination, especially with this kind of subject matter. Like, I think this enables you to go deeper into subjects and obviously gather information, which is key when you're putting a book together or writing a piece. But it's the in-depth nature of our backgrounds combined with sports, I think, is a good combination, because we're lacking that, especially nowadays.
Yes. The biggest difference now is, before we gathered all this intelligence, information intelligence, whatever you want to call it, and put it in a book, gave it to some guys with a even higher, deeper security clearance than we had, and move on to the next thing. And here in the news business, sports writing business, you gather information, you get all this stuff, you get the really, really good stuff, and then you can tell the whole world about it. That's the fun part. Is sharing it with people. Exactly.
That's the big difference, because you have to be okay with being anonymous, especially when you're in intelligence. That's a very anonymous business, as you know. But it's almost like sports writing is too anonymous in itself. That's why I have a lot of writers of any of the vocations in sports. I have the most writers, because I want to highlight, hey, you really liked that article, you really liked that book that you read? Well, read that byline for me to make sure you know who produced that.
Thank you for doing that. Yeah.
I think it's important because, we didn't used to be able to have a byline when we were in intelligence. There was no byline, maybe to certain people that were cleared, but otherwise it just got grouped in with everything else, and
that's right.
And like you said, went to the top. But no, it's always fun to talk with you about this stuff, especially on something like this, because it is an important subject matter, and I'll make sure to try to advocate for that movie, because I feel like that's another piece that could help these dominoes that we're trying to get to fall, because I'm actually working on something similar with former Lions quarterback Eric Kramer, who's become a friend of mine through the show.
Great.
And he has. Go
What's
ahead.
his claim to fame? Four touchdowns on Monday Night Football. How about that?
I know, and he's still. This is wild to me. This is on the Bears side of his career, but he had the season passing record for the Bears, even though they moved to 17 games. He had the season yardage passing record for the Bears up until this season, and he still holds the touchdown record for the Bears.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it's the fact that it's held up that much when the passing game has really increased on the football side of things, and now they have an extra game to do it. So he's holding up, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with his book and what happened after his career, but his career his life got kind of upended after his career, and that's what the movie would kind of address, because he's trying to deal with some serious issues with conservatorship and how the courts handled his story. He's actually going to be doing the third part of an interview series I'm doing with him in a couple weeks on my Thursday show, because it's kind of the same thing. He's trying to get his movie out there to kind of give a voice for the voiceless, kind of like we're doing here.
Good for you, and good for him. I hope that happens, because I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know there's a good story there. There's a really good story there.
Yeah, exactly. So I'll be throwing this into the mix, though, because I'm glad you're in talks with folks about this potential movie, because not only would it provide a lot of entertainment, but it would almost cycle through another iteration of the representation that the 1998 group got, because that's kind of what happened with. I would venture to guess that's what happened with the actual Miracle movie, because a lot of folks I was born in 1983, that happened in 1980. Being a sports fan, I had learned about it after the fact, but that Miracle movie brought it back into the forefront, and that's what, if they do a Miracle of their own movie, that's what that could do. Yeah,
and of course, we didn't need a whole lot of a huge history lesson when you talk about the United States and Russia in 1980. The Cold War is still very cold. The two sides are both sides got their hand on the trigger on the big red button, and we lived in fear in the 60s and 70s and the 80s, and kind of cooled off a little bit, but those are tense, difficult times, and when you got a bunch of college kids playing a professional hockey team like the Soviets were in 1980, the best hockey team in the world, best program in the world, and they found a way to upset them, it was a big deal. And the reason I would encourage people to watch this week when the United States plays Canada, the two best teams in women's sports, this is I'm telling you, Ryan, this is the best rivalry in sports. The Canadian women against American women, they really, really don't like one another. I covered the entirety of the Wings Colorado Avalanche rivalry in the late 90s and early 2000s, and I know how badly those teams really, really didn't like one another. The Canadian women, American women against one another this week is as good as rivalry gets in sports, and people need to sit down and watch this game because it's going to be a lot of fun.
I agree, and in comparison with that Cold War rivalry that you're talking about in the 80s, that was kind of more of a snapshot in time on the men's side because of multiple factors. Obviously, the U.S. men they've put a good team together and they're rolling now, but they don't have the same. Obviously, it's not even the same construction of the countries at this point in time. But so that hasn't continued. But this has just added fuel to the fire. That was more of a one-off on the men's side, but the women's side, that was the turning of a page that led to a whole separate book of consequent rivalries because we haven't even covered between 1998 and today.
Right, exactly.
So definitely worth watching. Now, we got to get you out of here soon, but I feel like I can't have an expert on the Red Wings and a former beat writer, not actually ask him a question about the Red Wings here at the break. So I'm curious if I'm sure you've been following them some, and I'm curious to get your
sure.
thoughts on the season.
I follow them very closely. I'm in touch with Scotty Bowman a fair amount, Jim Devellano a fair amount, Paul Woods, the radio analyst, Ken Cal. I talk to those guys all the time. So I'm not only watching what everybody else is watching, but I'm also talking to folks to get some behind-the-scenes information because I'm interested. But I got to say it's been fun to watch this team this year. A lot of difference between this year and other years. They're getting stops from a goaltender, right?
Exactly.
They're getting stops, and it's taken Steve Yzerman a long time to get the goaltending thing figured out. And he's got it figured out at least temporarily right now with these two guys, Cam Talbot and John Gibson, and they're both playing pretty well. But Gibson's playing really well. Nobody could have expected that. And I think that another big difference is a whole season from start to now with Todd McClellan behind the bench. They didn't have the right coach the few years before that, and they have a coach with some credibility that players listen to, respond to. Maybe they're a little afraid of sometimes because he's not afraid to throw them under the bus when they deserve to be, which I don't mind at all. But the team is made up now mostly of NHL players, right? as opposed to maybe as many as a third of the players are AHL guys, American leaguers, and they have no real business trying to play a full season in the NHL. But that's how thin the cupboard was. The cupboard was almost bare in terms of prospects, developing players, and so on. Steve Yzerman, in my view, has done a really, really good job. It hasn't been fun being as patient as he asked us to be, has it? It's not been fun at all. I can understand why people are a little bit, frustrated. But I can't imagine anybody else coming in here and doing a better job than he's done since he's been here, since 2019.
And you hit on it, Keith. He had to restock the cupboards, and now not only does he have NHL players at the NHL level, shoot, he even had to send a couple down here to Grand Rapids, and now he's got a real good team rolling here in Grand Rapids, off to what was a historic start, basically in the history of the AHL. So
that's right.
The tide is rising, I think, for them in general. Like you said, that goalie situation, they right-sized that. They got a true 1A and 1B. They've got a lot of young goalies in the system to come up. Yep. And now we're seeing some young guys that are ahead of schedule. So I'm curious. I know they're in a hiatus and they're in the Olympic break, but I'm curious if he's going to add anything here, because I could see him adding a piece or two, because as the old saying goes, they played well enough to earn the ability to make a move at the break here.
I couldn't agree more. And frankly, I thought he should have done something at the break at the deadline last year, because it's nothing. These things are often symbolic more than anything else. It's a way of the general manager saying, "I like what you're doing. Keep doing it. Here's a little bit of help for you." Right? Here's a little bit of help. Players they worked their butt off last year, and Dylan Larkin, spoke out. He was a little upset about it, that they didn't do anything at the deadline, and I couldn't blame him for that. A lot of people wanted to be upset at Dylan Larkin for that. Are you kidding me? He's the captain of the team for a reason. Let him talk. That's good. Let him get it out there. And Steve Yzerman wasn't shy when he was when he was a captain of this team. I covered him from the time he was 19 years old on. He wasn't afraid to speak up. Neither is Dylan Larkin, and I think Steve Yzerman respects that. I really think this year Yzerman will do something, and it's going to be more than symbolic. He's going to make a move or two, whether it's maybe it's somebody with a little bit of size, somebody with a little bit of belligerence, somebody that people don't like to play against so much. I think the wings get pushed around still too much. I'd like to see him upgrade their center position as a real number 2 center, although they're getting some good work from Kopp these days and so on. But they're thin in a couple of places. Another defenseman wouldn't hurt. But Steve Yzerman will be able to do this before the before the deadline, and Ryan, all they got to do is play 500 hockey the rest of the way. Win one, lose one, tie one. Win one, lose one, tie one the rest of the way. They're going to be in the playoffs.
Exactly, and they've been resilient so far this year.
Have.
That was one of the improvements under the first full year of McClellan here, where they did have some nice win streaks, but they also accompanied them by some pretty long losing streaks too. So this year they don't get down for too long. That's one of my favorite lines that I've heard regarding what the Red Wings need. They need belligerence. I'm going to take that forward here, Keith, because that is true. They do need it. They can't have. I think I just saw a statistic that Finney is one of the leaders in hits on this team.
Yeah.
They need some.
Yeah.
They need some guys that are going to get in there and mix it up, kind of like the guys that you wrote about on the grind line. They need some of those guys.
Oh, by big time. If if they could get one guy like that, somebody who bumps into people like Kirk Maltby did, or instills the fear of God in them like Joe Kosha did and Darren McCarty did. They need somebody like that. Listen, Dylan Larkin is not a big guy. He's not small, but he's not all that big. But Larkin, Raymond, DeBrincat, Kane, these are all smaller guys. Their best guys are on the small side, and they're getting their butts kicked by people taking liberties with these guys, and nobody holds the other team accountable at all, and that's the thing that's going to hurt Detroit down the stretch in the playoffs. Is that if they got nobody, if they don't have anybody that guys don't respect, then it's going to be a short series. They're going to run out of their own building. They need some size and some belligerence, some truculence, as Brian Burke would say.
I completely agree, and that's. I know the enforcer role has kind of evolved a little bit over the years, and it's not as prominent, but it's still very useful. And I feel like it's especially apparent with Raymond. He always gets just. Run over out there. Yep. And I know Sider has tried to be in that role, but they need him to be in an adjacent role. Right. And so I agree with you. I think if they just add a couple bodies to mix things up, they're going to be well improved. They don't necessarily need a big name or a huge acquisition as far as asset wise. As far as what they have to give up, it's more about those enforcers. So great stuff, Keith. Really appreciate you joining the show and taking the time. Great stuff on the women's side of things, and then glad we got to cover the Wings a little bit. And I'd love to have you back on maybe later in the season. Hopefully, maybe after some movement on the women's side of things, and maybe to talk about an impending Red Wings playoff run here.
Oh, I would love that, Ryan. Let's do that. Okay, let's make it happen. I appreciate your having me, and. Good luck with your show and everything you got going on, man. Keep up the good work.
Thanks. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm glad we can pair together intelligence guys in sports here. We've got to keep our brotherhood together. But
that's right.
But I appreciate it, and we'll talk to you again soon here.
Thank you, Ryan. Take care, man.
You
Bye-bye.
too. Thanks, Keith. Thanks to Keith Gave. Great stuff from him. I would implore people to check out not only his book, A Miracle of Their Own, and all of his other books. If you haven't read those, especially as a Red Wings fan, listening to this segment, The Grind Line, and all of his other books. Russian 5 is one of my favorite books of all time, and definitely sports books of all time. Yes, maybe because my intelligence background combined with sports, which is what that book's about. But it's basically like a stranger than fiction type book that outlines how the Red Wings got the players from Russia. Keith was a key part of that whole operation. We talked about that in his last interview with his intelligence background. He was basically doing cloak and dagger operations for the Red Wings here. So interesting stuff. We'll look forward to having him back on. Appreciate him coming on. We got another big time guest coming up here. Hopefully, Coach Ray Scott, who was the coach of the Pistons back in the day, first African American coach to win Coach of the Year here, and we're hoping to get him on and talk to him about his upcoming book. He's still writing. He's put me to shame. I only have one book out. He's releasing his second book in his mid-80s here, so we'll hopefully get Coach Ray Scott on after the break. stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. We're trying to get Coach Scott on. He's a hard man to get a hold of. He's too busy probably writing and doing things and making memories and doing all sorts of stuff. He's got a really interesting backstory. We've had him on the show once, but he has a backstory. I mean, these are going to be old names for you, Aaron, but his book is just riddled with the celebrities of his time. It wasn't just basketball. He played and knew guys like Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain, and Earl Monroe wrote his preface of his book, and Connie Hawkins. It goes on that side of things. But he also knew, like, he was on the old comedic scene too, so he knew like Henny Youngman and Rodney Dangerfield and Jerry Lewis. I don't know if you recognize any of those names. Maybe Rodney Dangerfield. Do you know who that is?
A little bit. I mean, when you listed off the basketball names in the beginning, I was like, oh, Bill Russell, Will Chamberlain. Like, yeah, I know those guys. So everyone else on that, I was like, I don't know.
Dangerfield's, of those guys, he's kind of one of the main ones that's transcended a little bit. His whole bit was I don't get no respect. That was his main thing, and he had a whole bit about his wife and what his wife would do and stuff. But he was a pretty revered comedian. But just a who's who: Aretha Franklin, Martin Luther King. There were a lot of folks back in that day. So we'll hope to get him on at a later date here. But we'll reset the show a little bit. We'll still have Pistons coverage, thankfully, because we have Kyle Metz coming on he's a Pistons content creator, and he focuses on basically free agency, contracts, trades, and so I think he'll be able to help us understand the Pistons contract situation now and going forward, what they did at the trade deadline, and then what that means going forward. I thought he would be a good one to come on and explain that, because he's got a lot of knowledge of how these things work. As far as I think a lot of people were hoping they would be more aggressive, but they made a move that gives them flexibility for the future. So much like the situation with the Lions, they're trying to clear money for their internal core so that they can make sure to re-sign players, because this is something, Aaron, that I try to remind people on the football side of things. When people are saying, well, you got to go after Max Crosby, he might be available, so we got to trade for him. And what I try to make people understand is, when you're trading for a guy like Max Crosby, it's not about the fit with the Lions. He'd be, as far as his play on the field, he'd be a great one opposite Hutchinson. I'm not too concerned about that. He's got some injury history, but other than that, I'm not too concerned about his play on the field. It's the idea that not only would you have to give up a large package of assets to the Raiders to get him, but you would be essentially trading the ability to re-sign at least one of your internal players. You would be saying goodbye to Sam Laporta, Jack Campbell, Brian Branch, somebody like that, because you're limiting your cap flexibility by making that acquisition. So you're not only giving up those current assets, there's hidden assets in there that you're giving up as well.
Yeah, I've always been more of the one to, build through the draft and keep your guys. I feel like anytime I've seen teams like go after big name guys, put them on blast. I'm not a huge fan of like Stephon Diggs. Never liked him. When Houston got him the first, I think it was like season before, I was like, no, that was stupid. Didn't make sense to me, because I was like, they were building young. Everybody, they had young quarterback. It's like, why go for the diva veteran who's a lot of money? You know what I mean? So I always kind of felt, stay away from those. If you're going to get veteran guys, get guys that are cheap.
One of the main things that all these Detroit teams are doing, even the Wings, talking with Keith Gave about it, that the Tigers are doing it, all four of the major sports are doing it right now in Detroit. They're protecting their culture, and that word gets thrown around a lot, but it is a very important concept, because, you throw a Stephon Diggs, to your point, Aaron, or I remember a few years ago when they needed another receiver, a lot of my friends here were wanting DeAndre Hopkins, and talented guy, talented receiver, but I don't think he would have been a good fit, because again, you have to account for kind of the hidden figures of all of this. You've got that, we talked about that with the trade, but you've also got that when you acquire somebody that is like a Diggs or a Hopkins, then you've got a guy, you've got another mouth to feed. You've got a guy that you've got to feed in the offense and get involved in the offense. If you can have an offense that's built around St. Brown, Laporta, Montgomery, Gibbs, Williams, you haven't heard any of those guys complain about touches. Nobody's gone to the media and gone, hey, I didn't have enough balls thrown my way today. Montgomery, yeah, he had a little bit of a bumpy season, but he still has been pretty minimal in his complaints about being involved, even though he should be more involved. It's hard to do that because, again, it's like you only have 24 hours in a day. It's the same thing with the amount of plays in a game. You only have a certain amount of plays. Gibbs is one of the best running backs in the league already. You got St. Brown and a top receiver. You've got a deep threat in Williams. Laporta got hurt, but he was on track for an all-pro season before he did. So you only got one ball that you can spread out amongst those guys. So it's hard to do. So you want guys that are happy. It's one of the keys to life overall. You got to be happy with what you have, not constantly wanting something else or keeping up with the Joneses here. But it's an interesting concept with the Crosby thing. We're going to be talking to some folks about building out the off season a little bit more. We're going to have Josh Quapo on next week on the Shane Graham show, where we're going to talk about, he's a contract expert across the NFL. He works for PFF now, and he's going to be able to kind of talk us through how this Lions offseason will work, because he works within the budget and says, okay, who are you going to be able to re-sign? How are you going to restructure contracts? And then we'll build out a whole offseason with him. So that should be interesting. But we'll take a quick break and then come back here in studio, and then in a little bit we'll bring on Kyle Metz and talk some Pistons. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM.
From the GarbarinoRoofs.com studios.
Country with a twist. Jethro FM. 1530 AM. WYGR Wyoming Grand Rapids. 94.9 FM Grand Rapids. 99.5 FM Lowell. And Jethro South. 980 AM WAKV Otsego Plainwell. 98.9 FM Otsego. And 105.1 FM Kalamazoo. Available worldwide at jethro.fm.
That song is called The End of the World. Kind of a funny song to come on after I was saying, oh, hey, be happy with what you have. Oh, here's the end of the world. So thankfully we're not at the end quite yet. We're not at the end of the show either. We're going to have Kyle on here after this next break. It'll be a good couple segments with him. I want to take this opportunity to thank all our sponsors here: Collectible Insurance Services, Eric Hall Aesthetic and General Dentistry, Calder Financial, Grand Management Group, Rydan Investments, Encore Business Group, Jim Hegland of JH Realty, Williams Chiropractic, I-Core, and the West Michigan Sports Commission. They just had their luncheon here. It was a success. Really good inspirational talk by Dr. James Dixon. He was one of the this is a yearly luncheon that they do at the West Michigan Sports Commission, Aaron, and they've had some great guests. They've had the aforementioned Steve Yzerman was there a couple years ago. They had Alan Trammell. They've had Tom Izzo a couple times. They had Beeline. I mean, I could go on and on. Those are the types of people that they normally bring in. And Dr. Dixon wasn't necessarily the biggest name as far as sports go, because he wasn't a professional athlete, but he was a very inspiring story, because basically he was an amputee as a younger boy, and he had his leg amputated and had to have a prosthetic, and it basically had what was, by all accounts, a very successful sports career. Sports helped drive him, and he was able to get better and better prosthetics as things went on. We've done a lot of interviews with former title sponsor Mary Freebed about their prosthetics and the evolution of those things over the years. But he was able to use that, and he even got a collegiate basketball sports offer as part of his collegiate career, and then he became a competitive power lifter, where he actually deadlifted 700 pounds as his high. So this is with only one leg. And I told my nephew this, thinking I would inspire him with this story, because it's an objectively inspiring story, and it makes us that are maybe more able-bodied. I've had a lot of problems with my arm, but I was able to retain the arm. I didn't lose it. It was a little dicey at times, but you like I was saying earlier, you're happy with what you have. You think, okay, I I'm motivated to do more with what I have. Well, my nephew was telling me, oh, well, he had a prosthetic, so that helped him. I said, no, that's not how that works. You don't have the muscle mass in that leg or anything like that. So it's a very impressive feat. Be sure to check out Dr. Dixon, very inspiring speaker, and it was a great event. It will have Mike Gusweiler, the president of the West Michigan Sports Commission, on here pretty soon. I have made contact with Tate Hull's agent, Dr. Hull, and they are planning on coming on one of the shows here at some point in the off season after Tate's busy schedule kind of eases up here in the March time frame. So we'll be happy to have them on. But I also want to have Collectible Insurance Services on, being the presenting sponsor. They have a lot of interesting stuff about collectibles as a whole, and it's not just the sports collectible side of things. They do things on jukeboxes and pinball machines and Pokemon collections, but they have a lot of good information on the sports collectible side. So we'll have them on at some point too. We'll probably have Dr. Williams on at some point to cover the injury side of things. So we'll be getting some more sponsored content in the mix, hopefully, as we go here. But we're looking forward to getting Kyle Metz on. He's going to join us here after the break and talk some Pistons with us. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy to bring on this next guest. I've actually been trying to get him on for a while. We try to have kind of holistic coverage of all the sports, but the Pistons too, and we've had a lot of different pundits on. But Kyle's got a great expertise in contracts and team management. We focus on that a lot. So I thought, well, no better person to have on after the trade deadline here. But I know you're a basketball fan on the whole here, Kyle. So I'm curious what you thought of the All-Star game and the festivities this year, since we just had that this weekend.
Yeah, Ryan, it's great to hop in. I'm glad we could make it work. Yeah, the festivities are great. I thought it was really entertaining. I thought the format really lent itself to increased competition, and obviously Wemby really caring about it helped with like some of the other guys really, buying in. And so I think it was a lot of fun. It was fun to see JB and Cade and Duran work together. It really looked like a Pistons game at times, the way the offense they're running and locking in on defense. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I think like you said, the dedication to defense was really preeminent this year between JB. I think all those factors they talked about, JB being one of the coaches, he wasn't going to let guys slack off, especially his two guys that were on his team, Cade and Duran. And then, Wemby, I mean, he's just different. I don't think I've ever seen someone so mad over losing a game at the All-Star game.
Yeah, his reaction was very funny on like the fact that after the first game we were talking about a botched defensive rotation in the All-Star game definitely showed you that something was different this year. I don't know if it'll last every year, if it was the format or what, but it definitely worked this year.
We covered the All-Star games both on the hockey side and basketball side last year, and it wasn't unique to have this opinion. I'm not taking a victory lap on the opinion, but I remember watching the Four Nations and on the hockey side of things and thinking this would work very well with the Pistons, because I was just talking about this with our hockey guest, Keith Gave, the Red Wings former beat writer and author of a bunch of Red Wings books. We were talking about how I was actually at the 92 Olympic trials in Oregon and how that expanded the reach of the game as a whole on the NBA side of things. And now it is a very worldly game. I mean, those names that are on the world team, I mean, if you're starting with names like Doncic and Jokic and Wemby, you've got a good team. It doesn't matter who else you put on there. There's a lot of other good players on that team. And so with how international it is, anytime you wrap the flag around something, that gives you more passion, makes it have more interest from people as a whole. We're seeing that with the Olympics right now. People care about pushing a stone down an icy path with a squeegee behind it. As long as you put it in terms of a country, you're not really seeing anybody follow shuffleboard that closely at the local places here, as far as I've seen. But no, there is a lot of passion for it as a result of that, and so I'm hoping they do hold that. I think the shorter games helped a lot too, because they couldn't take that first quarter off. They couldn't have the dunk fest that they normally have because the games were only a quarter.
Right. Yeah, I think the shorter format definitely helped. I thought it was interesting to have the championship games still. I'm glad, obviously, that they did, because we got more basketball and got to see Cade and those guys win it. So they might tweak that, because I don't know what would have happened if the World had won by 2 points in the last game. They would have all been tied. So I'm curious how they would have figured that one out. But yeah, it was definitely entertaining, and because it kind of features a worldwide thing. And I think with it being the Olympics right now, it definitely fit the theme of that. And so I'm interested to see if they'll continue doing it in the future.
Exactly. I wouldn't mind multiple world teams too, or just having I don't know how you would do world. You could do world maybe against the U.S., but yeah, thankfully with the international flavor to the game now, you've got more options. But want to talk about those Pistons had three. Well, I guess I don't know how many we're considering. I think the DJ made the All-Star game. Do we count him, Kyle? I think the Pistons DJ made it.
Whatever is tied to the Pistons that was there, we're going to count it.
Yeah, I think he made 4. I forget the gentleman's name, unfortunately, but I remember that announcement during one of the Pistons games. But this has been a fun team. I'm sure, like everybody else, you've been overjoyed with the turnaround here. It is an amazing turnaround that they've made, and I'm sure you're like this as well. I'm the type that it doesn't matter if they had a season like a couple seasons ago. I'm still watching every game. Doesn't matter if they're piling up losses. There's still things to learn, and I think we're seeing that. They've got the young core from that time frame, and one of the main guys that I wanted to cover with you, because I haven't spent as much time as I'd like to on him, even though he's had such a great, unique season. But you've done a very good job of covering the contract situation of Danis Jenkins. We've been talking about him on the show basically since the inception of the show, because he had just come off of a very good summer league performance, and I was saying, hey, you got to watch out for this guy. He's got some very transferable skills to the NBA. We were talking to some scouts on the show about him, and I'm just very pleased to see him come to fruition here. We're also friends with Chad Bush, the Motor City Cruise announcer, and he was basically saying, like, yeah, I was seeing him every day. This is what it was looking like. So I'm glad they finally got him converted here and on the roster, because I think his play over the course of the season has kind of led to what they could do at the trade deadline too, because you had the ability to go, okay, we kind of had a dearth of backup guards, the backup ball handlers behind Cade, and now this year we almost have too many. So they needed to adjust the minutes there, because as I cover on the show a lot, you've only got 96 minutes between those two positions. You got to spread them out amongst a lot of guys. Cade's got to get his minutes. Duncan's playing the 2 a lot. You've got to get those guys in there, and there were just too many bodies. So unfortunately, that meant that there was no chair for Jaden Ivey at the trade deadline. But I'm curious how you saw all that with both the conversion and then the Ivey trade here.
Yeah, no, I think you summarized it pretty well. Jenkins' emergence definitely shortened the runway for Ivey. It was already going to be a condensed runway because of how good the team had been. But I think going into the season, even like a month or two in, there was a sense that, like, if we can get Ivey right, this is still going to be what's best in the long run. Both either for this team or just an asset management standpoint, right? But Jenkins earned his minutes, and frankly, there was a lot of minutes he wasn't getting because they needed to try to give Ivey some space to get back. And then Sasser came back too, and obviously with LeVert being in there. So, yeah, I mean, Jenkins really did kind of snatch his chain, so it were. It's like, this is kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, it kind of forced the hand to give Ivey a fresh start somewhere else, which is really what I think the trade was about. Yes, they got Herter, who I think they do think can contribute. I know he hasn't shot the three well right now, but that's not really all that he does. And I think he has a chance to, over the last 30 games or so, whatever it is, like, he has a chance to show why he might be valuable next year on a much smaller contract. But could be another guy next to Duncan that can space the floor, but also give good optionality with passing the ball and the way he plays defense. So I know I'm tangenting off of Jenkins, but Jenkins really kind of precipitated his play and his emergence, really precipitated that. And he just looks like a guy who belongs. And so, I think early on, I think it was maybe a few weeks after he started playing regularly, I put an article on Detroit Bad Boys about what his contract situation would look like. And it played out a little differently than what I expected, but it's a great deal for the Pistons, quite frankly. I thought for sure he was going to convert, and then he's going to want to try to get money this offseason. And he could have gotten close to $60 million over 4 years this offseason if he had done that route. I don't know if anyone would have offered all of that, but he could have. That would have been his max. So it's a great deal for Trajan to use up some of the biannual this year and get him locked in with a team option. I think that was a real win, having that team option next year. So it gives them a lot of optionality, which if you follow the Pistons, you know that's Trajan Langdon's favorite word is optionality, and boy, do the Pistons have it for this summer.
Exactly. You're leading to a lot of paths I want to go down with you, especially the summer, because I'm sure we'll have you back on, time permitting, when that actually happens and towards the off season, since that's one of your areas of expertise. But I'm glad you went through that with Jenkins and the situation, because I mean we've had Javen Hunter on the show. He's a friend of the show, Jaden's dad, and we talked about Jaden the whole time. It just didn't seem like it was destined to work here for a lot of reasons. You could write up and think up a lot of reasons of why it should work, and on paper it really should have, but in execution it just didn't. Yes, the injuries factored in. There was a little bit of a duplicative skill set thing, but I kept seeing flashbacks of what the Kings had with De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton. And then somehow, no offense to this former Piston, but then somehow fast forward a couple years later, they ended up with Dennis Schroeder and an aging Russell Westbrook as their primary lead guards, and ended up with neither Fox nor Halliburton, and Halliburton was basically one Achilles away from a finals victory here. And so the Pistons managed the situation well, as far as, okay, we're not gonna get into that situation. And then Ivy's injury obviously added to how things went, and then with the player acquisitions that they made both through the draft and then free agency, it just made it so, okay, well, yeah, Jenkins is ahead of schedule. Sasser, like you said, fills a specific role, and then Ivy was looking a little duplicative. I think he can be very good in Chicago. I questioned at first why Chicago traded for him, not talent wise, but then they had a bigger guard overload than the Pistons did, but they alleviated that some as the trade deadline progressed.
Yeah, I mean, Chicago is very curious. Like, I still don't fully understand, to be honest, but I think it's the same reason why we all thought Ivy could play next to Cade, right? They've got Giddey there, and having Ivy next to him, if Ivy can get right. He's a second draft buy low guy. They'll have rights for him. And so maybe they think that he's worth bringing back on a cheaper deal. But at the very least, I think it was to get off Herter's contract and to do some other things, to get off Saric's contract. And so that was they were obviously wheeling and dealing a lot. So I'm sure it had to do with their tax level or certain things like that. I haven't gone deep dive into all their moves, but they definitely have too many guards, but they also were finally, for the first time in forever, deciding to lose some games on purpose. And so it's probably good for them in the long run.
Yeah, thankfully we don't have to work out their cap situation too much, but I do want to talk about Detroit, especially going forward here in the summer, because we were talking about this before you came on. We were talking about it from the Lions' perspective, how when you make a trade, there's a bunch of layers to those trades. It's not just about this asset for these assets. there's all this undercurrent, and so I want to talk about that with the trade and with how they're setting themselves up for the summer with that optionality you mentioned. So we'll take a quick break and then come back with Kyle Metz. Stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Coming back here with Kyle Metz, having a good conversation about the Pistons, both this season and beyond. Not that I want to get too far ahead, because I want to get your takes on the current season too, Kyle, but I just wanted you to expand a little bit on what you're talking about with the contract situation, because this does give them the ultimate freedom. One of the reasons I was starting to kind of turn on the idea of trading Ivy, because I was at one point kind of against it, but you just weren't sure what was going to happen with that contract situation. And I think they wanted to give themselves that optionality, be more in control of the situation over the summer. And now you've got that. You've got some room. You've got some cap space. You're in one of the better cap situations in the NBA. And you're going to have to start paying some people out. You've already done it with Cade. Stu's locked in to a degree, but Duran's having an all-star level season. Then you've got Thompson after him. You've got these people that you did invest in the draft. And so I'm curious how you kind of see the trade deadline coinciding with kind of that off season and what their priorities will be.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think they're with everything that was moving to Duran taking a big leap really accelerated some things too, right? Because now, and it seems like in the summer, so just to clear some things up from what I was hearing and understanding, that Duran was pushing for the max already over the summer. And so there wasn't really going to be an extension that got done. And so it was always going to go to restricted free agency or this summer. They were always going to have to give him a new contract this summer. They were far enough apart. And Ivy was similar. He wasn't in a position where he wanted to accept a value deal. He wanted north of $30-some million, which that's the type of player you could argue he was before the injury. Some would disagree with that. But so I think what you're saying is they weren't going to be able to pay everybody. And I think something that we, especially as Pistons fans, we get really loyal, especially the draft guy. How many times did we, many of us, at least on Pistons Twitter and fandom, think that Jordan Bone was going to be the next guy, right? We fell in love with these guys that always had to stick around. They had to be, Saban Lee, he had to be part of the core four, and it was devastating when he didn't turn out to be that guy. But the reality is, over the last 20, 25 years, on average, the number of players on a roster for championship teams is that they've actually drafted is 2.5 tops. So most of the time, it is that you draft a lot of good talent, and then you end up having to consolidate to get the pieces that fit best. That's how most championship teams are built. You have exceptions like the Spurs and the Warriors, but most of the time it's you get one or two stars that you drafted and everybody else gets traded away. And so that was always going to be the case. It's unfortunate Ivy was one of those. But there's a lot to look forward, right? Duran is probably going to get close to a max. He's probably going to get close to the max he can get is 5 years, $240 million, which is a lot of money. And it starts at $41.5 million this year. If he gets the max, he's going to get close to that. And so that definitely changes some of the calculus, right? If he was getting closer to 30, then you might be able to pay another guy 25 and still be navigating those tax aprons and things like that later. But him being close to that $40 million does put a strain on the cap sheet over the next couple of years. Now, I think he's probably worth close to that. And so you hope he lives up to that contract. But so what this does, it gives them a lot of options for this summer. Whether they could even become a cap team, they can operate over the cap or under the cap. They have a lot of options to go with, kind of depending on who they want to target after this playoff run. I think they'll know that.
Exactly. And I mean, I'm guilty of what I kind of accuse other people of doing with this Pistons team, but part of the reason I wanted to do it with you is because you do have such an expertise here. But I feel like, I don't know if you feel this way too, it feels like people are kind of fast forwarding through this season a little bit for a team that has proven to be very strong, has been firmly atop the conference for the majority of the season so far. It just seems like people, even leading into the trade deadline, were going, well, they need another this. They need to add this. And I get it that there's some things that they could clean up. They needed some shooting, and they're hoping that Herter can do that, as well as some other things, like you said. But with the depth of this team, with the experience from last year, with the coaching, with what they've done, I don't like the idea of writing them off here for this season. I'm not saying you're doing that, and I'm certainly not, but it just feels like that's what pundits, national pundits, and folks are doing here. They've always got somebody else that they like, and then sitting atop the Eastern Conference is the Pistons. But their playing style won't transfer to the playoffs. I don't know if I see that being the case. I actually think it could transfer quite well.
Yeah, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll definitely know that people accuse me of looking forward and always wanting to trade people. So they kind of forget what I do a little bit. But no, I get that. I do think it's the combination of because there are some obvious holes that the Pistons could fill and could be exploited in the postseason, like we saw with the Knicks last year. Beasley was on fire, had one of the best shooting seasons in NBA history, and then came up cold in the playoffs. And so if that happens again, that year we had 2 volume shooters in THJ and Malik Beasley. Now we have 1, right? So if teams game plan around Duncan Robinson, this is the fear, right? If teams can take him out of the game, it has the potential to really hurt. Now, our defense is a different level this year, and I think they have the ability to get through round 1 for sure. I think a deep playoff run is definitely possible, but it's not hard to see why people are like, let's see how this translates, because there are some obvious holes. Now, I think they have ways they fill those holes, and I think they have ways that they make up for that we're maybe underselling the way that the Pistons can do that. And I just think the Cavs run last year also, gave us a little trepidation. Like they steamrolled the regular season last year and then came up dud in the first round, right? And so I think that's part of or maybe it was the second round, but it was so people have some history there that they're concerned about. But I definitely think all of the metrics show that the Pistons have a chance to make a finals run. Whether they can win it all this year is yet to be seen, but they definitely have, all the analytics, the 40-20 rule, the strength of the remaining schedule, their top 3 seed. They have all of the markers of a championship contender.
I agree. And a lot of this is a war of attrition. That's why, like the Knicks team, obviously they don't have Thibodeau in charge, so maybe they're not going to be quite as run down by the time they make it to the playoffs. But we saw this in the Flip Saunders era of the Pistons and other places in the NBA, where the more minutes you give to your concentrated core group in the regular season, sometimes that can wear them down, especially if they're aging. Now, the Pistons are a young team, but because of maybe some of the injuries, some of the rest, but also the depth, these guys they're going to have fairly fresh legs, pending no major injuries or anything like that, when they get to the playoffs. And I know that we can get kind of enamored with, okay, well, Danis has come on. Paul Reed, when he plays, is very exciting. And no, I'm not proposing that Paul Reed plays 30 minutes in a playoff run, but there's also this depth that's helped them propel themselves to that well over that 40-20 rule, 40 wins before 20 losses, but also it's kept the legs fresh. And if somebody does go down or has a bad game, they do kind of have a next man up mentality, more so than I've seen in a lot of the other teams. It's one of the deepest teams in the league.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think that's what we saw with the Thunder last year. The depth makes a difference. And so I'm excited to see how it goes. I mean, I definitely think it helps. Typically I don't trust heliocentric offenses too much, and Cade carries a lot of load. If you can call it heliocentric, it's definitely close if it's not, right? And typically that tends to falter around the conference finals, like just from like a legs standpoint. So, but Cade seems to be getting better, and I think the depth can help with that. And it's nice that he's gotten to take some games where he's only had 20, 25 minutes, and they're blowing teams out. And so if they can continue to do that with their bench guys, I think they're set up for success.
And that's the other thing with the Herter trade. I know you talked about his shooting. I do think that there's got to be a measurable bump with when he gets in place here with the Pistons. He's a veteran, and I know people were focusing on, well, he really hasn't been shooting well. The situations he was in seemed like kind of tough formats to be shooting well. Now you're with the floor spacing created by Cade and Duran and all the movement that they have. He's going to get open, and I got to think that 3-point percentage is going to tick up, where that's basically the one place that they don't have a lot of depth. They don't have, like you said, that second volume shooter behind Duncan. So if they can tick everybody up as it goes on, as far as the 3-point shooting as a whole, but then Phil Herder into, okay, yeah, now he's up to 5+ 3-point attempts a game, and he's making them at a level more comparable to his Hawks days rather than his Kings and Bulls days.
Right. Honestly, I think what gets taken for granted, as long as teams guard him like a shooter and he can hit just enough shots to keep them honest to guard him like a shooter, it doesn't even have to be that great of a percentage. It's going to have the intended effect. And he's not a zero on defense, so you don't have to have him be, 15 points a night, 18 points a night to be effective. And so I think once they get him integrated, yes, if his shooting comes around, that's gravy. I mean, that's definitely the intended reason. That's that they sold, hey, we got more shooting, but teams still guard him as a shooter. And I think that's right now the important thing. Over the course of the series, if it doesn't happen, teams might adjust to that. And so, yes, that's where you kind of need to see him hit just enough to keep him honest. And so I think that's where if he can get up 5 threes a night, and that's his role, and can do some other things, I think that will suffice at least for this season.
That's the big buzzword now. It's just funny how these buzzwords get aggregated. Now the big buzzword is gravity, and he would have some more gravity than even a Jay Ivey, who was doing fairly well on the catch and shoot, but he wasn't really pulling guys out like you would want. And you do have, although they are good players for this team, you do have a few guys that really have no gravitational pull. Thompson, Holland, their teams are usually pretty good with saying, okay, we'll live with this shot, with all the ball movement and the creators and the good players you have on this team. We'd much rather prepare for a crashing drive from you guys than an outside shot. So having one more guy that can pull somebody into that corner defensively is much more valuable.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm curious who else has stuck out to you here on the team as a whole. There's a lot of good choices. We talked about Danis, we talked about some of the other guys on this team, but I'm curious, who maybe is an unsung guy that has kind of drawn your eye over the course of the year.
I mean, Javonte Green has been a revelation, right? He is great on defense and is athletic and I love his energy, and also can hit the three, at a decent clip. He has been, a great signing for this team, and I'm curious to see what they do with him next season, and if they can afford to keep him on a minimum. I think he's probably earned himself some money potentially. And so that's where it's going to start getting interesting to see how Trajan decides to prioritize the depth that he has created. I think they have some moves they can make to get rid of some redundancies on the roster so that can happen. But that's kind of everyone right now everyone's always obsessed with cap room, right? So it's we can get $29 million in cap room next year. But that also means losing all the guys we're raving about this year and the depth that they have, or at least letting them walk and hope they come back on a much cheaper deal, right? And so I think Javonte Green is a guy that I would hate to lose, and hopefully they find a way to keep him. And so that's ultimately why I think they're gonna be an over the cap team next year. I think most likely, so they can keep his bird rights or at least keep the early bird rights that they have on him and try to. Sorry, it'll be non-bird rights. I'm sorry, it's getting late in the evening, but they have some easier paths to re-sign him if they stay over the cap. So he's a guy that I would like to see stick around.
I would too. It's funny to see his evolution. I remember him being on the Celtics. This is an archetype that I've always been interested in, because the teams are always interested in 3-and-D guys. It's something that It's something that's very coveted by NBA teams, especially nowadays, because it's kind of the two building blocks for the NBA game right now. But there's a couple archetypes that are interesting to me, and one is kind of this developing 3-and-D. I don't think a lot of people saw him as necessarily a 3-and-D type player, and I know he's not a prolific 3-point shooter, but it's the same way that we don't really draft for the sixth man role, a la Jordan Clarkson, Jamal Crawford, Lou Williams, the guy that is kind of a tweener. He's maybe drafted to be something a little bit more prominent at starting point guard. He ends up being a tweener guard. It's kind of like how they say you never see any baby pigeons. That's what I think of with these positions, where you never you don't see them when they're young, and then they kind of develop. And Javonte Green is that same way. I want to build out eventually an archetype for something like this, and Javonte Green fits it perfectly, because not only did we not think he was going to be a 3-and-D guy, he also wears a T-shirt under his jersey like Derrick Jones Jr., who was also like this. So I think that's part of it. I think if I were trying to aspire to be this, I would put a T-shirt under my jersey.
Yeah, that makes a star does it too. So
exactly,
there's something to it. But yeah, I hate to do this, but I told you before. About we're expecting a baby girl, and I think I need to go.
No problem.
Tend to my wife, and so thank you for having me on. I hate to cut it short.
That's okay. We were going to let you go
again.
We were going to let you go anyways. Congratulations on all that. We wish you all the best, and we'll definitely have you back on. Appreciate you coming on, and good luck with all that. And we'll have you once you clear that time frame a little bit.
I appreciate it so much. Have a good evening.
All right, take care, Kyle. All right, thanks to Kyle Metz. Yeah, he did tell me that. I didn't know. He must have had some urgent issues to contend with there. I'm sure anybody that's a parent or an impending parent can relate to that here. So he's got a lot of work to do. But we appreciate his time covering the Pistons. Good stuff there. We'll have him back on. It'll be good to have him back on kind of towards the off season, anyways, when he's hopefully in better shape timing wise, because he is great with the contracts, and there's a lot to work out in the modern day NBA as far as the aprons and all of that kind of stuff. So we'll get him back on, but we'll take a quick break and then come back in studio with Ron here. So stick with us. You're listening to Sports Intel on Jethro FM. Happy you could join us. Good. It's been a fun show today. We got some good time with Kyle Metz here, and hopefully he didn't have to run to the hospital. I just checked my notes, and his wife is due pretty soon, so maybe there was an emergency there. But appreciate his time given the circumstances, and appreciate the time of Keith Gave, the only other intelligence sports content combination in the industry as far as I'm aware of. I don't know. We'll have to maybe try to find some other ones here, but because we need some more people in our support group. Keith and I, it's just a 2-person group right now, but no, glad they could join us, and thanks again to all of our sponsors. Ron, I was talking to you about this before the show, but I wanted to bring it on to the show because we've got an interesting guest coming up on the Shane Graham show on Thursday. So this guy, if anybody's heard of the documentary on Amazon called Cocaine Quarterback. It's about a guy named Owen Hansen. I'm going to really try hard not to call him Owen Wilson, because that's where my brain wants to go. And that is not his name. It's Owen Hansen. But he is from Hollywood. He's from the LA area. He played for USC. He was on that famed 2004 team. And he basically was on the championship team, but he was kind of a backup player, didn't play much, and he saw Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush and Lendell White and all the stars going on to fortune and fame, and he thought to himself, well, how do I get fortune and fame? And he went a little different route. He started working for a cartel, and he became a drug kingpin, and he ended up being a pretty successful one. One of the things that we're going to talk to him about this on Thursday, but one of the things I was somewhat impressed by is he had an actually very good business model. As an entrepreneur myself, not in that industry, to be clear, but as an entrepreneur myself, I was impressed by his business model and how well he did that. He's now got his own business that we'll talk about. It's a protein-based ice cream, I think, or like an icy, like the Hawaiian ice. I don't know which kind. I have to do more research by Thursday here, but it'll be an interesting story. I know we were talking about that team because that was one of the most dominant teams, that USC team, and he converted from the volleyball team to the football team and then went on a very interesting course in his life, and now he's written a book about it. There's the documentary, and so this is a contact of Shane's that I'm excited to talk to on Thursday here.
Yeah, can't wait for it. I'll be here as well.
Yeah, Aaron will be in studio with us. That'll be an interesting one because it's just, we like to do this declassified series on the different football players, and we've interviewed some interesting folks. We're going to be doing part 3 with Eric Kramer here coming up fairly soon, and we've interviewed we interviewed Jake Moody of Michigan fame. We had him on a couple weeks ago, Aaron, and it's been an interesting series. We've been trying to get in depth with people, and this will be a good guy to get in depth with because you can kind of see where he went into this, and because a lot of guys, they go into football so they can get that fortune and fame because it is a potential way for them to elevate themselves and those around them. And since Owen didn't have that as an option, he went this other route. But I like how clear he's being about it and how transparent and how authentic he's being about it, because now he's trying to teach the youth of the world, like up and coming folks like you, Coach Aaron, and basically saying, hey, yeah, I can see the pull into this, but this is not the way to do it. Stay on the football field, stay in school, have the slow build, take the legal route, and you won't, end up on my path. So I like that he's using his story. I think people in his position could go, well, make excuses. Oh, well, my childhood or this or that. But he's gone on the path of, no, I'm going to teach and advise and hopefully affect youth and not let them get on the same path. And I feel like that's something you probably try to do as a coach here, because you're a coach locally. That's what it's all about. You're trying to coach them football, but you're coaching them in life too.
Yeah, and that's always the biggest thing we preach too, because not too many. There was only a handful of Division I players that came from Godwin. So obviously, we like to use college as or football as a tool to help them get into college so they can create a better future for themselves.
Yeah, that's really what goes hand in hand. I know the anti-NIL folks would say, well, that's what you get for going to college. You get a scholarship. Now there's the NIL route, and that's also changed the trajectory in college because it gives more opportunities for these kids that make it to college. Maybe they're not going to make it to the NFL. Maybe they're not sure, but college is more lucrative for them as effectively the developmental league for the NFL. I mean, that's basically their G League. That's their minor league is college. And now at least you get kind of compensated accordingly here if you're going to college and bringing money into the college. But yeah, it's an important thing to talk about, and that's why we're going to do that on Thursday. We're also going to have Jeremy Reisman, as I mentioned, from Pride of Detroit, and we're going to talk about the Petzing interview and talk out the Lions off season here, because that'll be an interesting off season. Want to make sure you tune into the rest of the Jethro lineup here. We've got the Sports Project with Steve Project, the sports professor, 7 to 9 on Wednesday, and then the aforementioned Shane Graham's Extra Points with me, so you get to hear me more, but Shane will be there, so you won't have to hear me as much on Thursday, 7 to 9, and then the Sports Project again, 10 to 12 on Saturday. And then make sure to tune into the rest of the Saturday lineup because I always highlight the sports side of things because I'm on the sports side of things. But you got Conrad's Country Bunker holding it down every day during the day, and then Rowdy Yates coming on in the nighttime window there for every day of the week. Then over the weekend, you got Polka Pops, you get your polka fix. There's a lot of, if we were doing this on a Tuesday, Aaron, there's a lot of Polish food. That's the thing of the day tomorrow. I don't know why, but things like punchkis and cabbage, that's tomorrow here. So we just missed that. I would have loved to ask everybody their favorite Polish food and then talk about pierogies, but that would have railroaded the show here. But yeah, tune into the rest of the Jethro lineup, including Jeff Isaac for his all request show. If you missed anything or want to rehear anything, we're available on podcast on all the major podcast networks, YouTube, all of that stuff. Rex is holding it down. I know you haven't heard about him lately, but he's doing a good job with that. I don't know where he is. He's maybe hanging out with Keith somewhere internationally because he's also that hybrid. But appreciate you joining us. Have a great week and stay informed and stay vigilant.